Like modern navies, the Imperial Navy officers were classified by rank, which determined how much power they held within the Navy. Today, I'll be talking about all the ranks that one could achieve in the Imperial Navy. Our first rank on our list is a midshipman, also referred to as ensigns and cadets. Midshipmen were officers who were still in training and rarely saw combat. They were identified by having two squares, a red one on the left and a blue one on the right. But depending on the uniform they were wearing, it could also be arranged as one red square on top and one blue square on the bottom. The next rank on our list is a lieutenant. Now there are actually three different types of lieutenants, so I'll give a brief explanation on the other two. The first one was known as junior lieutenant. They were identified by having two squares, a blue one on the left and a blue one on the right. The next rank after that was a lieutenant. Lieutenant was by far the most common rank in the Navy. Almost all the people on the ship were lieutenants, except for the captain and the admiral, and sometimes there might also be a commodore or a commander or something like that. The lieutenants were identified as having four squares, two red squares on the top row and two blue squares on the bottom row. The next rank was a senior lieutenant. Senior lieutenants were pretty much the same as lieutenants, except they often had a little bit more responsibility. They were identified with the same rank insignia as a lieutenant. The next rank after that was a captain. Captains commanded single ships, generally cruisers, and were sometimes given command of a small fleet of cruisers. Captains were identified by having six squares, three red squares on the top and three blue squares on the bottom. The next two ranks are very similar, which are commander and commodore. They both acted as the admiral's right-hand man on the ship. Sometimes a commodore would be given control of a ship and sometimes the fleet if the admiral had other duties to attend to. Both of these ranks were identified with the same rank insignia, which had 8 squares, 4 red squares on the top and 4 blue squares on the bottom. The next rank is admiral. Admirals were in command of a fleet of capital ships. Admirals were also identified with the same insignia as commanders and commodores, with 8 squares, 4 red squares on top and 4 blue squares on the bottom. The next rank is fleet admiral. Fleet admirals were in command of multiple fleets of capital ships. Fleet admirals were identified by having 10 squares, 5 red squares on the top and 5 blue squares on the bottom. The next rank is high admiral. They were in charge of fleet admirals and commanded sector fleets, which controlled certain sectors of space. High admirals were identified by having 12 squares, 6 red squares on the top and 6 blue squares on the bottom. The final rank that one could achieve in the Imperial Navy was Grand Admiral. The power varied between the Grand Admirals, with some only being in charge of a couple of fleets, and others having control of entire regions of space. Grand Admirals were identified also by having 12 squares, but unlike High Admirals, Grand Admirals possessed yellow squares, which were arranged like this. In the top row, there were 3 blue squares on the left and 3 yellow squares on the right. In the bottom row, there were 3 blue squares on the left and 3 red squares on the right. Grand Admirals also wore the extremely rare white uniform. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for the Navy ranks. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope this cleared up any confusion about the ranking system in canon. There's not a lot of consistency on the internet when it comes to this topic because a lot of people are mixing legends with canon, and it's not all correct. But anyways, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.